Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We are an open dialogue on culture and ideas, and we're so delighted to be in the Upper West Side home of Brian Gari and his lovely wife Jeanne. And Brian is a very talented composer and author. He is the grandson of Eddie Cantor, one of the greatest entertainers of the 20th century, actually, yes. Star of Broadway, singer, comedian. So he grew up with that environment, soaked all that in, and has gone off on his own to be a tremendous, composer, playwright. He had a play on Broadway.
Never wrote a play.
Never wrote a play, but you did write a musical?
Yes. I wrote the music and lyrics for a Broadway show.
Okay, so this is an open, rambling dialogue here on creativity, on show business, on lessons from your grandfather, on the latest work that you're, involved with today. So why don't we start with growing up in such a famous...
Never grew up.
You never grew up. Good. Don't ever...
Peter Pan.
Peter Pan complex. Here we go. Jeanne, is that true? His wife is over there? Okay, okay. And again, here we, yes.
You want to know about growing up?
Growing up, but what was the story? How was it? Were you close to your grandfather, to Eddie Cantor?
I mean, if you're going to go that route of Eddie Cantor, I would visit him every summer from when I was a little boy until I was 12 years old. But I grew up in New York, and he lived in California, so I would only see him in the summers. But New York was my home, and still is my home, and I've never left. So this is my place. It's convenient for me. I can get around easily in New York. I used to drive a motor scooter, so I got around very easily on a motor scooter. Now I'm stuck in the New York City subways, and
not a good year for the subways, right?
97 degrees on the platform. So, yeah, I kind of put up with that because the Metro card is the way to get around. So,
And you're dressed like very summery today, or?
Yeah, well, because it is summer.
And it's a hot summer.
Oh, yeah, except today's pretty good. So, we have the windows open, which is why you can hear the helicopters, which are probably surrounding us because of Trump,
Probably now, yes.
I think something's going on, or somebody's been murdered and they're looking for the murder suspect right now in our neighborhood, which, I've put up with for my entire life, so.
You're not going to be testifying before the grand jury anytime soon.
Well, if they pay me enough, maybe so. Okay.
Actually, one of our former guests, Randy Credico, he's testifying today.
Today, yeah. I knew Randy at Catch a Rising Star. We used to perform together at Catch a Rising Star. He was one of the comics on the bill. Because don't forget, I go back to the 70s when there was Jerry Seinfeld, Larry Miller, Bill Maher, George Wallace, oh my God, Randy Credico was there.
Yes.
Joy Behar, kind of towards the end of my run there. Then she came in.
Joy Behar, can we get on The View maybe sometime soon? Or?
Can't even get in the audience of The View. So
Joy, what's going on?
Well, and Joy lives right near me too. So Joy, if you're watching, which I doubt if you are, but I gave you a copy of the late Nite Comic album, and I never heard back from you. So.
Anybody who knows anybody who knows anybody knows Joy. Okay.
That Joy Behar, yes. But I love Joy Behar.
Yeah, of course,
and politically, we're on the same side.
Absolutely, yeah. Wow. So, since you mentioned Jerry Seinfeld and that whole Catch a Rising Star scene, did you think you wanted to be a comic at one time, a stand-up comic? Was that one of your goals? Or?
It goes through my mind now because I seem to make a lot of people laugh on Facebook with some of my posts. But I don't know if I would have a way of creating enough material for a nightclub act like that. But I did engage in conversation with the audiences at the comic strip where I started, basically, and Catch a Rising Star and the Improv, because I would perform my own songs, and I needed to converse with the audience. I learned very quickly, maybe it was from my grandfather, but I learned that you must communicate with your audience. You don't just get up there. Like, I watched who's the guy that did Pops? Michael Franks. Yeah. I went to a concert of his, and he never spoke during the concert at all. No. And Popsicle Toast. Okay. And he's a very good singer, musician, and everything. But there was no engaging in any kind of repartee with the audience. Whereas people like Randy Newman and Jimmy Webb, they all conversed with the audience, and I learned from them that that's an important part of doing a show. You could write all the songs you want, but if you don't have any kind of rapport with the audience, you are going to lose them no matter what. And I'm trying to remember. I remember Jeanne and I went to see a show, I think recently, where it was so boring because the person didn't make any. Who was it? Oh yeah. Let's not. Oh God, I can't name names because it would be.
Jeanne's over on the couch there. She's present here.
That's right.
Okay, show Jeanne. Say wave, Jeanne. Jeanne's here. Jeanne's in the house, in the room.
And I've been married 8 years now, so.
God bless you.
It's my second time around, and hopefully I got it right.
Right. Okay.
But
second time, me too, with Claudia.
Oh, really? Second time?
First for Claudia, second for me.
Oh, okay. Did you have kids?
Our television show is our child, so we've actually had 180 children because each episode is like a child.
Yeah, I never had kids personally, but I just realized early on that I was doing a lot of writing and performing, and it took up my time. I never even imagined having kids. I certainly wanted a relationship, and that takes up time too. So I don't know how people can do it, and I don't think people can necessarily do it with the best way of doing it, of bringing up kids and having a career. It's really hard to even have the career. I mean, the amount of time that I spent on my career was enormous between doing demos and recording albums and Broadway show, off-Broadway review. I had just enough time, hopefully, to have a relationship with the women that I was involved with, and and to have kids. I don't know how I would have done it.
I'm reading a novel now called Who is Rich? It's a novel by a man named Matt Clam. He's a writer named Matt Clam, and he wrote this book called Who is Rich? And it's about a guy who's unhappily married, and he's trying to be a cartoonist.
I wanted to be a cartoonist. Yeah.
And anyway, he's doing that, and he was actually kind of famous early on, and now he's been forgotten. Okay, so once a year he goes away to this retreat in Connecticut. It's a seashore retreat for creative people to recharge their batteries, and he teaches a class there once a year in the summer. He goes there. So one time he meets a woman who's taking a class, and she's the wife of a billionaire, and she's unhappily married, deeply unhappily married, and he strikes up an affair with her. And in the meantime, so this whole novel is a meditation on the difficulty of creating while married, because his marriage is like not very good. He has kids. It's very suffocating, and he can't be creative. And it's exploring all these themes through the literature. I think sometimes reading a novel can give you insights into these things, But you're right. It is hard to do that.
A lot now too. I've read so many books every year. I never used to read like this, and I hated reading when I was growing up. It was, as I have said before in certain articles and stuff, where I went to school, they made us read, well, in the beginning, in 6th grade, going into 6th grade, they made us read 3 books in the summertime, which is my time to spend with my grandfather and my grandmother and my family. And it was torturous for me. And I remember the first bunch of books was like Mutiny on the Bounty, Quentin Durward, I forget what else, but there were books that were really a drag to read for a kid, 11 years old. It was just, I didn't want to read books. And it turned me off to reading for many, many years. But then when I got into, deeply into music and certain writers that I wanted to know about and artists that I wanted to know about, and then just books, in general. I mean, I've been reading Malachi McCourt's books and Frank McCourt's books, and these are not music people. These are novelists, and talented ones. Carl Reiner's books. These are books that I am so passionate about, and so I've ended up reading a whole lot more. I also, as I mentioned earlier, I was riding a motor scooter a lot, so it was very hard to read and drive the motor scooter at the same time.
Usually work.
No, I was in many, many accidents, and they finally said, stop that reading. Either give up the bike or stop reading. So anyway, I did give up the bike, And since I'm on the subway and buses and stuff, and when I was visiting my mom in the nursing home and back and forth to hospitals and things like that, I would pick out a book to read. And I suddenly was reading book after book after book after book. And I love it. Even during my recording sessions, when my engineer is working on saving a certain part or whatever, and it takes 20 minutes, I'll continue reading my books. So I have been reading a lot more.
Do you think any of that work gets into the song in terms of the intellectual activity?
Oh, yeah. I remember reading articles about J.D. Salinger, and I would really write songs about newspaper stories and things that I read. I read the Times every day. Yeah. So, I catch up on things, and it does a lot of times work its way into my songs because I can't always write songs about my wife.
Oh, no.
So
sometimes, though.
I have to take a break and write something about something else, just so that I don't bore myself with, oh my God, you're doing another song about Jeanne?
Yeah.
Although the whole new album is all about Jeanne. So.
Oh, isn't that sweet? Isn't that sweet? Let's go back again for as far as the Eddie Cantor influence and specifically like how did that impact you, in terms of your creativity, in terms of your dreams. They say sometimes that if you have a very famous person in your family, it can be, have the opposite effect that like you don't want to go into show business, you want to do the opposite, but you did go into show business.
Yeah, but I didn't feel I was going into show business because I was a songwriter and I was behind the scenes. Now, little did I know, songwriters were a major influence on my grandfather. He wrote a whole chapter in his autobiography, Take My Life, called Songwriters. And he was very, very interested in songwriters, which I'm very proud to be a songwriter, knowing that was something that my grandfather was passionate about. But the interesting thing is he never knew I was going to be a songwriter because the first song I wrote was the month that he died. And it was not about him. It's just I decided to write a song. And my mother's encouragement of my writing that first song made me want to write more songs. So I continued writing songs, but I never considered myself, in quotes, show business or part of the show business family kind of thing. But it turns out that, if you're writing songs, you are in some way involved in show business. So it does work its way in, but I don't find that my Eddie Cantor roots had any influence whatsoever on where I am in my creative world.
Oh, interesting, yeah. Jeanne has a comment. What was Jeanne's comment? Go ahead.
Well, she's mentioning a letter that I got from my grandfather, the last letter that I have from him, which actually you can read in, it's been reprinted several places, but the first place I had it reprinted was on an RCA reissue called Eddie Cantor, The Best of Eddie Cantor, a Centennial Celebration. And I reprinted the letter, and in the letter, my grandfather says in 1964, which is when I wrote my first song, he says, I believe you're the one that's going to carry the torch of show business or whatever in this family. And it's interesting because I revived his music, his films, his writing. I did all that on his behalf and, kind of revived the interest in Eddie Cantor.
Well, when I was a young child, I was very close to my grandmother, and my grandmother had a sort of theatrical nature to herself. She used to break into song, and one of the songs that she loved to sing is "How You Gonna Keep 'Em Down on the Farm After They Seen Paris." That was an Eddie Cantor song.
It was an Eddie Cantor hit, that's for sure. If I'm not mistaken, it's Walter Donaldson, I think, that had a hand in writing that. Walter Donaldson died in his 50s and spent most of his time at the racetrack, like many other songwriters, like Julie Stein. I don't know, very intriguing to the songwriters. Not to me, but I never could fathom taking the little bit of money I was making and putting it on horses or anything like that. So.
What about Making Whoopee?
What about that?
That was a Eddie Cantor song, Making Whoopee.
Write it.
He sang it. He was famous for it.
Donaldson and Gus Kahn. And it was a very very well known song. Great song.
And they say Eddie Cantor helped get us through the Great Depression because of his enthusiasm, because his upbeat nature. He was in so many mediums. He was in radio. He was in movies. He was on the stage in the Ziegfeld Follies and Ziegfeld Follies. So
everybody mispronounces that word. Everybody.
All right, so you decide that you were able to imbibe something from your grandfather, but then you went towards songwriting and comedy, or a little of both?
Comedy. I just wrote songs, and I performed my own songs. They're mostly like a singer-songwriter, that sort of thing, like those people that I mentioned before from the 70s and 60s. Lennon and McCartney were big influence. Brian Wilson. I did a whole album of Brian Wilson songs. Yeah, I recognized really two major songwriters. Thank you, Jeanne. We now have some water.
Okay, great.
I had pepper on my macaroni and cheese, and a little bit of pepper got stuck in my throat.
Okay.
But what was I going to say about the songwriters? So Lennon and McCartney, Brian Wilson. Oh yeah, I really. I worship songwriters and great songwriters of my eras, 60s and 70s primarily, even the 50s. And I listen to all kinds of music. I was listening this morning to music from the 20s. Oh, wow. And, my grandfather was on the collection, but I heard George Gershwin playing Someone to Watch Over Me, and a great song called Don't Bring Lulu. Some really funny songs, Bye Bye Blackbird, all kinds of great songs, Sonny Boy. So, I appreciate songwriters, and the only two complete collections that I did of other songwriters was one of Brian Wilson, where I did some rare songs of his, and rare combinations of some of his songs, and I played electric guitar on most of that album, did all the background parts for the most part. And then I did an album of Roger Nichols and Paul Williams. And they, of course, wrote for the Carpenters, mainly We've Only Just Begun, I Won't Last a Day Without You, Rainy Days and Mondays, Let Me Be the One. Then other songs called The Drifter, and so many other wonderful songs. So I did a whole album of their songs, too. So, but there have been so many influences. Rupert Holmes, major influence on me. Jimmy Webb, Randy Newman, Stephen Bishop.
Randy Newman doesn't like short people, right? Short people got no reason to live.
Well, of course, that was a complete put-on, that song. But he was great, it still is. He puts out some very interesting albums even today, which is what I like, which is why I'm doing my album now, because at 66, I would like to be able to show people that I've been writing for the last 8 years some new songs that nobody has heard, and I thought rather than have them sit in a drawer, I'd better record them. So
they say life begins at 66. I just said that now. Yes. And you mentioned Malachi McCourt and Frank McCourt, who wrote his famous book, Angela's Ashes. That was the very first book he ever published. He was 66 years old.
That's what I heard. So, yeah, I love hearing stories like that, because it does give me encouragement that it ain't over till it's over, right?
Over, baby.
Yeah, he wrote some fascinating books. I read every single one of them. Tis is another one. Teacher Man, I think, is the last one.
Correct. Yeah, he taught at Stuyvesant High School, and one of the things that he would do is tell stories to his students there. He taught for 30 years, and when he finally started to write, it was really just going back to the stories that he had been telling over and over again to his students about his childhood in Ireland. And so that's why if you have a good story, tell it and tell it again until you get it right.
He's a charming guy, and Malachi is a great guy as well. I love the family. I find them fascinating, and of course the only living one now is Malachi, out of the brothers. So I just find it great that, he lives a block from me, so it's fabulous that I run into him, and and that he and I are friendly. He came to my book signing. It's just great. The people I've known a lot of really good people, and in fact, that's why I wrote a book called Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind. Ooh. Do you know about that book?
Tell us. Yeah, I heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a book that I wrote a few years ago about all the famous people that I've met along the way. In fact, Jeanne, I think you might be able to find it over there on the far left side. You'll probably see a whole bunch of books there, and the Close Encounters book is probably there somewhere. And we can show it.
So let's do like a top five of the most interesting people, celebrity encounters.
George Carlin, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
George Carlin was so much fun. He's a great guy, and he was going to come over here. There was like the last thing he was going to do, and yeah, it's one of the last things that he mentioned to me. He says, "Brian, I want to come over. I want to see your collection of the Upper West Side." You know, 'cause I have a lot of photos of the Upper West Side, and he's from the Upper West Side. So
did they name a street after him?
they did. In fact, Jeanne and I stood in umpteenth degree weather trying to get people to sign the petition to change the name of the street. And they did eventually change the name of the street.
What street is it?
It's probably 121st Street and maybe Broadway.
Okay.
And it's called George Carlin Way, I think, you know.
I heard the church that's next to it got upset because of the religious because of his 7 dirty words and stuff. There was a little controversy there.
Well, but George was really a truth-telling guy. He told it like it was and like it is, and he went one step further, I think, than Jeanne. You won't find it anywhere else. That is the place. Yep. No.
Far left, she said. Far left. Yes, yes.
It's right there.
Politically, we're on the far left, right?
On the left. Yeah, that's right. Does that have anything to do with it?
We call this the upper left side.
The upper left side.
When we look around at all these wonderful books and we think about the fact that now we have a president who doesn't read, and this has always been one of America's great intellectual neighborhoods, close to Columbia University.
That's very
right in the middle of it.
Yeah, people are big readers on the Upper West Side.
Yes.
There were a lot of bookstores. There aren't many anymore. A lot of things are closing down. The rents are too high.
Okay.
So they just go out of business. So there are no more, not many bookstores. But I buy most of my books online.
Okay.
I'm just constantly buying books and CDs and DVDs, and my thirst for knowledge is pretty much endless. It's just insatiable. I just continuously read, listen, watch stuff and everything. I have like 3 things taping tonight while we're having this conversation. So I'll be watching those things later on.
Yes.
Thank God for DVRs, right? Even though that they don't catch the endings of a lot of the shows, which is very frustrating. But that's our FiOS. Yeah.
I want to tell a quick story here because of how we met, which was a year ago, at the birthday party of our mutual friend Meredith Manna. Lovely person.
Yeah, that's right. That's the first time we met.
She's our dear friend. She's a singer, a very funny person too, wonderful person. We were at her party. It was at a Times Square restaurant, and looking out the window, we were sitting next to you and Jeanne, and there was the Walter Kerr Theater, where Bruce Springsteen was getting ready to perform in his one-man show.
Yeah.
And you looked at it and you told me a story that you had a play in that very same theater. Yes. Yeah. So I was like, amazing. Okay.
Yeah, it was my musical, my only musical that hit Broadway. But it's now called the Walter Kerr Theater, but at the time it was called the Ritz.
Oh, the Ritz.
And the Ritz on West 48th Street was ironically where I was 12 years old, and I would go to that theater. It was an ABC theater, ABC Broadcasting, and I would go to see Girl Talk there and The Price is Right. Both aired from there or were taped there. Okay. And ironically, I end up with a Broadway show there in 1987. So kind of fun to, but now it's been revamped as the Walter Kerr. So no longer is the Ritz.
Okay. And that was called Late Nite Comic.
Right.
So this was about a comedian, the play?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to think that I wrote the play or I was a comic or something like that. No, I just played in those clubs in the 70s and early 80s. And that's how I got to know all the comics. Okay. And the subject matter was close to my heart. And so, that's why it was called Late Nite Comic.
Interesting. Did you get particularly close to any comedians? Any particular? Are they in this book, Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind?
Most likely they are. I was close to, I still am, Larry Miller. Wonderful. He was in Pretty Woman, which is, of course, on Broadway now. Okay. Pretty Woman, that's Gary Marshall film. And who else? God, I was so close to so many other. Who are the other ones?
Kevin Meaney.
Oh, yeah, the late Kevin Meaney. I produced his album, his only CD. What a great guy, and a talented guy. You're going to poke your eye out. You're going to poke your eye. If you keep looking like that, don't look like that. That's what he used to do. And funny, I've just become friends with his daughter on Facebook. And it was a very, very sudden death. And very surprised. And we ran into him on the subway a short time before he died. It was a big shock, big shock. We've lost a lot of people. One of the other people that I was close to at the club, but we knew each other from before, is Alan Combs.
Alan Combs, what a great person. What a dear, what a great voice that we miss.
Yeah, his birthday is September 24th. It's coming up. But the death of Alan was so tragic. He was 67. Or 66. 66. He didn't even make it to 67. 66 years old. And he
Did he have health problems, Alan, or what was? I don't even know.
Not that I knew of. I don't think so. I mean, he died really within 4 months of finding out that he had lymphoma, and it was just 4 months of deterioration. And I'm sure not a very pleasant way to go. And I miss him terribly. He's was one of the kindest and most encouraging people to my career. We started being friends in 1972 when he played my first 45 on his radio station. The song's called Bicycle Ride by the late Don Ciccone, who also died 4 months before Alan did. And Don was the lead singer of the Critters, Mr. Dyingly Sad, he wrote. He sang that. He sang Younger Girl. And then he went on to join the Four Seasons. He was on Who Loves You. He was on December 63, Oh, What a Night.
Oh, yeah.
And he died at the age of 70. I lost my two closest friends within 4 months of each other. But, we were talking about my book. This is my book. It's called Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind.
That's Henny Youngman on the cover?
No.
Who is this?
Benny.
Jack Benny, okay.
Me with Jack Benny.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
no, there are wonderful stories in here. I don't know if they were the ones that you were mentioning about the people that I knew at the club, but in this book, Eddie Cantor, Danny Thomas, Georgie Jessel, John Lennon and the Beatles, Little Richard, Brian Wilson, Phil Spector, Neil Sedaka, Jeanne and Dean, Carole King, she got 2 chapters, the Carpenters, David Cassidy, Glenn Campbell, Stephen Sondheim, Marvin Hamlisch, Anthony Newley, great guy, George Carlin, as I mentioned. Chris Rock, I worked with in those early days. Okay. Robin Williams, Rodney Dangerfield, worked with him a lot. Right. Soupy Sales, a very close friend. Same with Jerry Stiller. Katharine Hepburn, I can't say was a close friend. No. And Mia Farrow, Bobby Kennedy, all those people are in the book. Wow. So, and then this is a book that I wrote. This is the first book I ever wrote, called We Bombed in New London.
That's New London, Connecticut, right?
Okay. And it's the inside story of the Broadway musical Nite Comic. Ooh. You hear that show? Yes. Yeah. And
did you bomb before the Ritz or after the Ritz, or how did that?
Before the Ritz.
Before the Ritz, you bombed. Okay.
That's right, and that should have told us something, but it didn't.
You still got to the Ritz, though. That's pretty good.
We got to Broadway anyway, despite, the producer said, what do we do? What do we do? And at that point, when you're that close to Broadway, you don't want to give up the credit. You're going to die probably, but you'll take a chance. It's not your money. It wasn't my money. So you just sort of take that chance, and of course, the odds were not in our favor. So, if you die out of town, you're going to die on Broadway most likely, unless you made some changes, major changes. Like, well, I can't say exactly, but.
But why did it bomb? Was it a critic? Did it get a bad review? Or and how much power did the critics have over shows?
Pretty much everything, And in those days, and I'm saying those days, it's not that long ago, but it was not the same as it is today, where you last maybe a month, something like that, instead of a few days. You last maybe a month, 2 months. You get a ride. Yes. Because there's money backing you for a long time. We didn't have any more money to back us, so we didn't last any longer.
I see.
And because you don't last a long time, nobody wants to do a cast album, although I now have a 20th anniversary fully arranged album with 18 Broadway performers on the album, including Liz Callaway, Rupert Holmes. Oh my God, it's such a great list. Paul Shaffer.
Paul Shaffer. Do you know Paul Shaffer?
Oh yeah.
Tell us a Paul Shaffer story.
He's in the book, actually.
I love Paul Shaffer. I mean, he's got the greatest attitude, man. He's a Mr. Showbiz.
But he's a great guy.
There's a kindness there. There is a kindness.
And you know something? At first, I thought this has got to be a put-on.
Right.
And it was not a put-on. He came to see Late Nite Comic, and he... here's a great story, and I tell it in the book, actually, in the We Bond in New London book. What he did was, he loved one of the songs in particular from the show. And I thought, okay, that's nice. I hope he's telling the truth. I hope it's not a put-on, Right. Well, about a couple of months later, I receive a check from ASCAP, which is the musical organization that pays songwriters. Sure. And it was for one of the songs from Late Nite Comic, and it says, as performed on the David Letterman show. And I thought, this has got to be a mistake. But you don't want to call up the company that's paying you because they may take back the money. Right. So I said, I got to call. I got to find out. And I said, what exactly, can you tell me what show this was? And they told me the exact show. Right. And I think it was Crosby, Stills, and Nash was on the show. Oh. And I said, well, I know they didn't do my song. Right. And I couldn't figure out who would have performed my song. There were no other performers on the show. But the tennis player, Gabriella Sabatini, was on. Well, my song in the show is called Gabrielle. And it was Paul Shaffer who remembered the song from hearing it one time. And he played it as an intro to Gabriella Sabatini. Is that how you pronounce her name? Gabriella? Or Gabrielle? Gabriella. Yeah, Sabatini.
Okay.
Yeah. So he did that for me, and I'll never forget him. So I actually went to see him when he had a CD or a book signing, and he brought me up on stage, up at the, and I don't have a video of this. I really wish I had. Jeanne.
Where was this?
At Barnes & Noble. Okay. And Jeanne was out of town. Jeanne usually documents this stuff.
Which Barnes & Noble was it?
Second and Broadway.
Okay, no, it was.
And it was so thrilling, I got to say. I mean, I know people say, "Hey, Brian, you're a star too," or you've done you've been on Broadway, you've had stuff on Broadway. But I don't look at myself that way. So when I get brought up to a stage by Paul Shaffer, to me, it's like I'm bowing.
It's a validation.
It is
huge validation.
And people look at me and they go, "Well, who's that?" I've never heard of this guy, and yet, Paul Shaffer was acknowledging me. So my life has taken many turns that may not be, to number one on the charts. But I'm lucky that I have 3 books out. Right. I have many CDs. I have all these great Broadway performers performing my song on that one particular CD. I've been friendly with some of the great composers, Neil Sedaka, Marvin Hamlisch. Where they know me on the street. Marvin Hamlisch would be walking up the street and he'd go, "Oh, hi, Brian." And it's Marvin Hamlisch. I go, "Wow." And it's not like I don't think I could do something, like do a movie theme. I think I could do that. Absolutely. I've done some themes. But, the success he had was enormous. You also, there's also this thing that I've talked about with Jeanne, which kind of is almost a frightening thing, but it sort of keeps you humble, is that, as much as I yearn for the same kinds of success that these people had, there's also a downside, not to the success, but to their lives. Like Marvin Hamlisch died at a young age, in his 60s.
Did he have a lot of stress? I mean, at that...
Probably. I don't know exactly. He got very much overweight. I know that. I can't imagine that it couldn't have been tremendously stressful. He had many other Broadway shows, none of which really was as successful as A Chorus Line. But he did have his share of success. I mean, he had, The Way We Were. He had Nobody Does It Better. He had, look, I'd kill to have one of those, just one.
So Nobody Does It Better. I remember that from the movie The Spy Who Loved Me, the Roger Moore. And did he do the lyrics and the song?
He did the music.
He did the music. Okay.
But he you know, he did have a lot of success, but he had a lot of flops too. You know, Smile came to Broadway. It was not a hit. There were a couple of other things he worked hard on. At the end of his life, he worked on the Nutty Professor, which Jerry Lewis and
The remake or the original? Okay.
and to come to Broadway, and it has never come to Broadway. So, you know, I mean, I was very lucky that I had something come to Broadway, despite its lack of huge success. You know, it attracted attention. The songs still get done in cabarets around the country. I hear from people that say, "Oh, I heard your song, you know, in such and such a club." I don't get paid, but you know, they get done. So, and I have song folios. There's sheet music out there, you know. So I do get things out there. I'm okay with that. You know, I would like it to be more out there than it is, but. You know, I'm lucky I have what I have, and I'm still only 66, so. Yeah.
Well, look at poor Anthony Bourdain. I mean, the guy had it all, you know, and he just...
Well, you can't talk to me too much about him because he was very detrimental to the animal species, and...
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, that's something that I'm very...
You're an animal rights guy? Are you? Okay.
Yeah, I'm very outspoken about that. I have protested on Central Park South against the carriage horses being there, torture for the carriage horses. The chickens at Kapuras, it's torture for those chickens. You know, they slit their throats and half alive they're swinging them around in honor of their religion and their religious ceremony.
No more chicken dinner, Claudia. That's no more chicken.
You know, I'm not telling people that they can't eat chicken. I'm not telling people that they can't eat beef. I'm not telling people any of that. I'm saying don't torture these animals. That's all. There's no reason to torture them. Those horses don't need to be on Central Park South taking people for a ride.
So you're with de Blasio on this?
Well, de Blasio hasn't really been enormously helpful. He said that the day he took office, he was going to stop that, and he did not, because he said he was up against the city council, and they were getting, I'm sure there are a lot of people getting paid off in this industry, the horse industry. There's a union, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that maybe he wasn't privy to. We certainly were at the, you know, at the protesting end of things. But, you know, I would say any of the stuff, I'm not saying about the food aspect of this. I'm talking about the torture of animals. I'm talking about the horses. I'm talking about the chickens. I'm talking about fur. You know, I'll be protesting against fur in front of Macy's in October.
Really?
October 8th, which is actually my mother's birth date. You know, I'll be, you know, I participate in these things. That's what I believe in. And, you know, there's no reason for these animals to be tortured, especially the fur industry, which is getting to be less and less, truthfully, which is good. But there are still people like the people who at Macy's that sell fur, and that's for, you know, no reason other than people's interest in having fur clothing. Yeah.
Brian, would you say you're from like the 60s generation? Because I have a lot of respect for what happened in the 60s and 70s, that people were out there protesting for women's rights, against the war. It was like this upsurge of activism that I think in some ways I feel like it's coming back now with Black Lives Matter, with the women's movements, with the, you know, against Trump and all that stuff. So, but you remember growing up, there was like a kind of polarization in our country then too. What was it like back in the 70s, 60s and 70s? Was that, were you against the war? Were you protesting?
Yes, of course I was against the war, but also we were scared to death because being 18 years old in 1970, the height of the war, we were, people like myself were scared to death. What are our numbers on the, what was that thing with the numbers?
Oh, the lottery, yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, I was signing papers to move to Canada.
Yeah, why not? You know,
why not? Is, you know, this was my home. I didn't want to leave New York. I was, you know, but we were all scared to death. We were all going to doctors trying to get phony documentation that we had flat feet, that we had hypoglycemia, you know, all kinds of really horrendous tests that were being done on us just to try to prove that we were not fit for the Army. And also, it scared me to death because there is nobody more unsuited for the Army than Brian Gari.
Really?
Nobody.
You're not going to go up 2, 3, 4. You're not the discipline.
Up one.
Up 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The 2, 3, 4 would never happen.
Okay.
You know, I'd
Be like Lewis, Martin and Lewis.
I'd be peeling potatoes
Okay.
endlessly.
Okay.
You know, or they want me to clean latrines with a toothbrush. You know. I mean, I can't do 2 push-ups, you know, to this day. I mean, I had open heart surgery, which I don't think is indicative of the fact that I don't exercise, but I don't exercise. I mean, look, you know, I've never been overweight.
Okay.
I do eat sugar items. I mean, I happen to be drinking water now, but that's okay. I have soda.
Count how many grams of sugar you have a day? You're supposed to count like so many grams?
Nope. I don't drink a lot of sugar items. I do drink Mexican soda, which has real cane sugar, you know, because it's not high fructose corn syrup. Not that it's supposed to be that much better for you, but I believe it is. I'd rather have cane sugar than high fructose corn syrup. I find that there's a strange aftertaste to high fructose corn syrup. So I drink soda that's Mexican soda. And I have all kinds of flavors that I love. I love tamarind, mango, pineapple, mandarin orange. I mean, I'm sure it's all junk, but, you know, I don't drink huge bottles of it. You know, I have a bottle, and I stretch it out for about a week and a half to 2 weeks. So, no, I don't drink it constantly. But I did end up with open heart surgery. I had a quadruple bypass.
How long ago?
It was 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago now, I think. And they said I was in for a massive heart attack. So now it does run in the family because my grandfather, same age, 60 years old, had a heart attack, had his first heart attack.
Eddie Cantor.
Yes. In fact, Jeannie's kind enough to give, this is my second book.
Okay.
And this is called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Stress Test.
Oh, okay.
And this is the story of what happened to me 6 years ago. I had to write a book. Of course, it ain't that big a book.
Okay.
You can open up hotel room doors with it.
I see.
But I'm real happy about it.
Who's on the cover?
That's me with my grandfather.
Eddie?
Yeah, because I'm helping out at the Heart Fund, which ironically, my helping out there would lead to the necessary surgery that I had, you know, how many years later? 50, 60 years later.
Okay.
The knowledge that went into people learning about what to do about the heart comes from my grandfather's work for the Heart Fund.
Didn't he do something with the March of Dimes also?
He started the March of Dimes.
Wow.
So he helped cure infantile paralysis because of his work on the March of Dimes. It was his name, and it was also his idea, because Roosevelt came to him and said, how can we make money to cure infantile paralysis? Should we have a big dinner, $1,000 plate dinner? He says, I think that if everybody gave one dime, and then Roosevelt said, well, how can we do that? Where would they send it? He says, well, you have a very nice address right here, meaning the White House.
Okay, yeah.
Today, don't send a dime to the White House.
Don't do that now, no.
Because he'd keep it, he'd buy some cheeseburgers, I'm sure. But yeah, so he started the March of Dimes. But in relation to my health, and I wrote the book really to help other people. And in fact, Glenn Campbell's former wife, Sarah Campbell, went under that surgery yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And I sent her the audio of this book to help her through. Because I feel really bad for anybody that has to go through this surgery. It is not the easiest surgery.
Your grandfather had those big eyes, like banjos. They called him Old Banjo Eyes. That was one of his nicknames. Another nickname was the Apostle of Pep. That's right. He really was huge back in his day. He was so...
He's an icon. He was an icon. Yeah, he was huge. He was the most popular name in show business, I would say, from... I would say the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s.
So Burt Reynolds just died yesterday. Okay, now Burt Reynolds, between 1978 and 1982, was the top box office star in America. We all know who Burt Reynolds was. He was on the front cover of the Daily News and the Post and today. But so he that's the kind of fame that Eddie Cantor had in his day. Even bigger in some way.
Cantor lasted more decades, than Burt Reynolds. And I must say about Burt Reynolds, I mean, I loved Burt Reynolds. I thought he was a great performer, great actor under many circumstances. But the interesting thing about Burt Reynolds is when I was 15 years old going to this horrible all-boys school called McBurney here in New York, I was watching a TV show called Hawk, which was he was the star of that show on ABC, and it lasted, I think, one season. And I actually have the videos of that show. I loved that show. I thought it was just a great show. And when I heard it was going to go off the air, I took up a petition in my school to try to keep that TV show on the air. And I got to the last kid, and he says, "That ain't going to work." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Because my father's the one taking it off the air."
Oh, no, that's so funny.
So that's showbiz.
That is showbiz.
Who would think that I'd be,
Amazing.
asking the kid of the guy who's taking it off the air, but that's what happened.
Okay, interesting.
And I don't know why it was taken off the air, but I guess it didn't have the ratings. I don't know. But
he played a Native American character in that. He played a lot of Native American characters.
yeah, he says the only one he didn't play was Pocahontas.
Right. That's
Right?
Okay.
I put that up on Facebook today because I thought it was so funny. But he was great. I mean,
We loved him.
great movies that he made, and very entertaining, very self-effacing.
Right.
Enjoyed him on Merv Griffin and Johnny Carson. All those appearances. He's a great show business personality.
Certainly was. In that sense, Eddie Cantor-esque in that way. Very uplifting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But yes, Eddie Cantor was a major star for most of the 20th century.
He just made people feel good. His presence. Now, they also said that he would also tell stories about the family. He would tell anecdotes on television and stuff, so people felt like they were just like a part of his family.
Well, that was a key to his shtick, I guess, was talking about his family. It did not please the family all that much because, he would always talk about trying to get his daughters married off like they were the ugliest things in town. And that, of course, bothered the daughters. My mother would tell me stories about that. One night, though, on the radio, it was really funny. He was so adamant about getting his daughters married that he gave out his own phone number over the air.
What?
And Ida, his wife, was answering the phone that night. She says, "What the hell did you do? You gave out our phone," and they had to change the number.
That's funny. Okay. Now, there was something with him and Jacqueline Susann. Okay.
I found that radio show.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I have it.
Oh, you have it here. Oh, this we have to look this apartment. It's filled with memorabilia. Claudia just flashed us the 10-minute sign, so we're going to start to wrap up. But we do want to look around the apartment. But I wanted to ask you about Jacqueline Susann.
What about
Eddie Cantor had a relationship with her or something? Or I read something.
She was in his show. She was in a show called Banjo Eyes.
Oh, okay.
And there was a rumor going around about why the show closed. The show closed because my grandfather had something that you don't talk about in that time, which was very, very bad hemorrhoids. So I'm sorry to say that on.
Sorry, folks. This is the truth.
Rather the truth come out rather than a rumor. And he was hospitalized, and he was told by the doctors, "You cannot do that vigorous performance every night." Of
pushed himself out there.
Well, my mother says it was the most exciting show she had ever seen, especially with him. And she said that when he came out, he was in a roll-top desk. That's how the first entrance onto the stage, which, by the way, in a theater that's still there, the Mark Hellinger Theater, is now a Church of Christ or something like that. It's on 51st Street and Broadway. And he would come out in a roll-top desk and then crawl out of the desk. Well, you can't do that if you're that ill. And everybody was really annoyed that the show closed. But, the thing is, it's like if you have a show with Barry Manilow, Neil Sedaka, Peter Allen, these are major stars that are personalities.
Sure.
And you can't have Banjo Eyes and have it star Alan King. Right. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, but that's probably not a great analogy, but it's just off the top of my head. You can't have that person open up a show or do the entire show as a replacement for Eddie Cantor. Right. So he had to stay out of the show closed. So a lot of people blamed him, and it must be Jacqueline Susann. No, and he gave her the break of being in the show. That's all.
There were rumors about an affair. That's all.
His her husband wanted to get her into the show, and he was friendly with my grandfather. Okay. So her husband, Irving Mansfield, had asked a favor of my grandfather, could you please get her into the show? That was what happened.
Okay. Very quickly, we want to walk around the house in 2 seconds, but we have a mutual friend in Joe Franklin. Joe is a guest on our show, and I just thought, we loved him, and we think that his style was very warm and engaging, and thank you. That's a great compliment. But you knew Joe as well.
Yes, my friends, Joe Franklin. Hey, we have a great guest for you here tonight. First of all, we have John over here who knows the business, my friends. He is the best. He's the best. And we have the grandson of the late, great Eddie Cantor. Okay. Eddie Cantor, my idol. He did for me everything that needed to be done. My great director, Bob Diamond. He wears an earring now in his ear. Okay. He is the best director in all of New York, my friends.
And what about Claudia?
Claudia is out there on camera. We love Claudia. Claudia is the best on the camera. There is no one like her. We are here for Hellman's Real Mayonnaise and Canada Dry and matzahs. We're here for the matzahs. It is the best matzah you have ever had. Hoffman Beverages, my friend. Hoffman. And we're going to do a little trivia, my friends, with Richie Ornstein. He's coming out here any minute. We're going to do trivia. Until then, we are having the time of our lives. Back to John, my friends.
Oh my God, the best Joe Franklin impersonation ever. Big hand, Jeanne. Yeah, beautiful. Let's take a little stroll through the apartment on the Upper West Side. We're on West End Avenue, between Riverside and Broadway, one of these big pre-war apartments, and look at all the books on the shelf. My goodness, this is intellectual energy here as we cruise around and take a look at some memorabilia that we have. First of all, we look at the books, and then we come this way. Oh, look, there's Mr. Eddie Cantor. Beautiful image of Eddie.
My mother left me that. That was done for my grandfather.
Okay.
By a famous artist. Let's see if I can read the name. Boris Chalisper, something like that. And it's something about France. It's probably when he was traveling to Europe. And so my mother left that to me in her will. Beautiful. And then this picture.
Who's the woman there?
That's Grandma Esther. That's the woman that brought up my grandfather. And this actual painting and frame was always above my grandfather's bed. Oh. So I actually have a picture of it with Eddie pointing to it. So it's kind of great to have.
That's beautiful. Henry Street. What's Henry Street?
Henry Street is where he grew up. So
Lower East Side?
Yeah, Lower East Side.
Okay.
Cool. This is an original Charles Schultz.
Snoopy there. Look at Snoopy.
And that was belonged to Arthur Siegel. Okay. I guess that was done on a napkin.
Wow, awesome. Riverside Drive up here, baby?
Yeah, Riverside Drive. These are things that have fallen off the trucks.
Okay. Mickey Mouse. Who did the Mickey Mouse?
My father did that for Macy's. Okay. He worked as the art director. I think there's another name for being the art director. What is that called?
Jeanne?
Display department. The display. He worked on the display department at Macy's. So, he did that, and he did the Popeye and Miss Piggy, right? Is that what?
Yeah, Popeye. Okay.
Yeah. So.
And now we see Next Attraction. I love that. Claudia, look at Next Attraction.
Originally from the New Yorker Theater. I have yet. This used to hang in this place here, but when we had a paint job, I never hung it back up again.
The next attraction in this interview is going to be Jeanne. He says, "Hello, Jeanne."
West 92nd Street, West End Avenue.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, West 92nd Street.
That's where we are.
Where we are, Jeanne. Okay. You want to say a few words on behalf of your husband or anybody or yourself?
Very proud of him. He's done a lot, and he wakes up and he's just like, boom. I mean, he reads the Times.
Wow.
He listens to music. He does like 5 things at the same time.
Wow.
And then by the time I get up, he's got all the news, and he verbally tells me everything that's going on in the world. So
How do you do
I
it?
collapse around this time of night. I can't keep up.
closed, no matter what we're watching.
Yeah, 9:30. It's like, oh no, don't send me to sleep. At this. So then I get some nice sugary sherbet or something like that.
Boost of energy?
Yes, and then I'm able to stay up for Colbert.
For Colbert, to make sense of the news of what's
Oh,
going on.
he's great. And, Colbert, and I should tell you that Colbert, I have a connection with because, in fact, it may be in my book, my Close Encounters book,
Okay.
I think.
He lives in Montclair, New Jersey.
Oh, is that near you?
Yeah, well, yeah, sort of. We're in Hoboken, and Montclair is not too far.
Well, Stephen Colbert was one of the stars of a TV show on cable called Strangers with Candy with Amy Sedaris.
Oh, yeah.
And my father played the dead father on the show.
Really?
My father was always like this. And he never spoke a word. He says it's the greatest role he ever had because he became very famous from it. People would stop him on the street and go,
Oh, look at that.
but he says he never had to memorize a word, never had to memorize anything. So when my father died,
Yes.
the only person from the cast that wrote me a sympathy note was Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert. Oh, nice.
It's on my father's website, robertogary.com. In fact, my website is briangari.com.
Okay.
And my mother's website is janetcantorgary.com.
Jeannie's website is?
I don't have a website.
Well, maybe.
No, I don't want one.
No, you want a little anonymity is always good,
Yes.
right? Yes. So you mentioned Amy Sedaris, and she used to write also for the New York Press.
Oh, yeah?
And I got one essay published in the New York Press, which I was very happy, and it's especially good to think about now because we just learned the Village Voice has closed.
Yes.
So that's another great New York cultural icon that's fading. We are in a very iconic New York neighborhood here, the Upper West Side, with Brian Gari and his wife Jeanne, and just going down memory lane, talking about Eddie Cantor, Brian's grandfather, and a lot of the work that Brian is up to in terms of songwriting and composing. It feels like we've only begun a conversation. We'd love you to come back, Brian, and also with other people. Maybe we could do salons and group discussions. That's why we call it.
Salons
Yeah,
to cut the hair.
not to cut the. Well, you could get a haircut too. I think you need a haircut, but wait. But we'll get some. You could recommend your friends, and but anyway. So thank you so much, both of you, for being our guest, and
Thank you.
thank my loving wife Claudia for filming us. I always like to give her a shout out. Without Claudia, who made my dream come true of having a TV show, love is the answer. Couples, you see, we got love. We've been married for 8 years.
Same as us.
Oh, look at that.
When did you get married? What date?
Well, actually, it was in 2009, Christmas Eve.
When did we get married? 2010.
Okay.
We met 2010,
2009.
I thought.
2010. We got married in
We got
2011.
married a year later, a year
Wait.
from the first date.
This is why we have to get mics. We have to wire up.
Okay, yeah, that's
But it feels like we've.
October 15th, and we got married October 15th the next year.
Well, which year? Did we get married?
2011.
Oh, we did. Oh, so we're not married 8 years.
Together 8
Are you married? Are you married?
We've been married 7 years.
Oh, we'll be married
October.
7 years in October?
October 15th, right?
Okay. I thought it was 8.
We've been together 8. We've been living together 8.
Okay.
10.
If in sin, shh. Okay, making whoopee. No, okay. Anyway, we this is a whole nother show we just started here, but we're going to wrap up this show. And thank you all for watching the Public Voice Salon. Thank you so much. Okay, take care.